Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dark Crossroads. This is your host Roxanne Fletcher, and today we're doing another episode of Creepy Corner. This episode is stories that I read that is sent in from my listeners. If you want your story read on Creepy Corner, just email it to darkcrossroadspodcast@gmail.com and leave out any information that you do not want read. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over that today's episode is themed to go along with very popular news articles happening right now. That is aliens and alien abductions. I know some of you are going to be very excited about this, others not so excited. And before we get started too, I just wanted to go over some things that are going on in the news. Basically just the top 5 keynotes that have been talked about in the Congress UFO hearing. So according to an ABC News article, one of the top 5 key points is that the government is absolutely in possession of UAPs. David Grush, who was a former U.S. intelligence official, told the Congress panel that he's absolutely certain that the federal government is in possession of UAPs, citing interviews he said he conducted with 40 witnesses over a 4-year period. Another key point is that he stated non-human biologics were found at one of the crash sites. Grush, who underscored that he has not personally spotted a UAP in person, told the panel that he knows of multiple colleagues who were injured by UAPs. He also said that he has interviewed individuals who have recovered non-human biologics from crashed UAPs. Another top point was that officials must establish a safe and transparent reporting process. Some lawmakers and witnesses pushed the federal government to establish clear channels to communicate UAP information with both the public and the military, and said the military should establish a comprehensive reporting process for unidentified objects. Another key point was stigma associated with sightings silences possible witnesses. Some witnesses and lawmakers at the hearing argued that the stigma associated with reporting UFO sightings, as well as the alleged harassment of those who work to investigate them, may be hindering efforts to determine their origin. And the last key point that was talked about was UFO spotted accelerating to supersonic speeds. David Fravor, a former Navy commander, said he and 3 fellow military pilots spotted a white tic-tac-shaped object in 2004, hovering below their jets and just above the Pacific Ocean. As he descended to inspect the sighting, he claimed the unidentified aircraft, which he said bore no visible rotors, wings, or exhaust, began to ascend and approach his fighter jet. He claimed that the UAP then vanished, only to reappear a few seconds later, but this time it was spotted 60 miles away. Fravor told the committee that the technology he and his team encountered defies logical explanation. The technology that we face is far superior to anything that we have ever seen, Fravor claimed, and there's nothing we can do about it. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so our first story today is titled The Encounter Abroad. This is a family story I've heard only twice. I can't remember how it was brought up the first time, but the explanation was very vague, so I asked again a few months later when the family had come together at the cottage during the summertime. They seemed kind of iffy talking about it, but provided more details. They lived in Ukraine, but took a trip to Turkey sometime in the 90s. They had rented a little cottage there that was far enough into the countryside to be considered fairly remote. Long story short, one evening the dogs outside started going absolutely crazy, barking viciously and just overall behaving erratically. One of them, my grandmother's brother, I believe, went outside to check what was going on and saw what they can only describe as a UFO nearing the cottage. Pretty high up in the sky, but lowering a bit as it came closer. He called for the rest of the family to come and see, and to this day they can still confirm what they saw. Well, at least the ones that are still alive at least. They said it was a triangle shaped and had 3 lights, 1 in each corner. When it got seriously close to the house, they really began to panic and ran back inside. The very walls were shaking, the dishes were breaking from the force of the vibrations going throughout the walls and the floor, and the dogs outside were barking louder than ever. It hovered over the cottage for several minutes before ascending back up and disappearing. These are all people who are very conservative and rational, and they hate discussions regarding the supernatural. so I have no doubt in my mind that they were absolutely telling the truth. This next story is titled When the Aliens Crashed the Sleepover. When I was about 12 years old, my best friends and I used to sleep out on my friend's trampoline in his yard in the summer. We would gather our bed stuff and bounce around until we got tired and then eventually lay down and fall asleep. One evening, 4 of us were laying on the trampoline talking when we noticed that there's something floating over the woods nearby. You couldn't see it directly, just that it blocked the stars out as it slowly moved. It was just a little higher than the tree tip-tops and completely silent. We were just some dumb kids at the time, so we just sat there and watched it. Slowly it drifted until it was directly over top of us. Then suddenly there was this light that I can't even describe. It was so bright it felt like it shined into you. The next thing I remember, we were all standing inside my friend's house looking out his sliding glass back door at the object still hovering there, and then it glided away. We were all spooked, but we decided to go back out to go to bed on the trampoline. We were laying there for a while, and the next thing we know, it comes back again and does the exact same thing. Again, we find ourselves inside looking out the back door. Beyond all reason, we go back outside to go to bed again. Same thing happens again. We finally decided to sleep inside with the lights on. My friends and I eventually lost touch as we grew up, but when I was 18 years old, I heard one of them was in town. I ran into him at a party one night and pulled him to the side to ask him about that night as it had bothered me for some time. His response has shaken me to this day. I cannot describe his reaction sufficiently. He looked at the ground and said, "I don't want to talk about it." I was kind of shocked by his response, so I didn't know what to say. He got up and walked out, and I stayed sitting there thinking about what just happened. I got up after a minute to go see if I could find him, but he'd left immediately after. That was it. I haven't seen him or the other since. But his response was enough to let me know something strange definitely went down that night. I don't know if I want to remember it. This next story is titled The Low-Flying Triangle. About 2 years ago, I was in Naples, Florida with one of my friends. We were on the porch having a smoke around 11 p.m. I was leaning on the railing when what I thought was a plane in the distance turned towards us. It was flying so low that the front lights blinded me. My friend scrambled for his phone, which turned out to be dead, and I, fearing I would miss it, didn't want to run inside and grab my phone. Though the craft was steadily gliding, it was all happening so fast. As the object got closer, we noticed it was a huge black triangle with 3 huge circular lights on the bottom. It was so close, just above the trees, right in front of the building. It was so silent. The only thing making any sound was the trees rustling below the craft. Then the huge black triangle turned on a dime right in front of us and disappeared over the tops of the buildings. I wouldn't have believed what I saw if I didn't see it with someone else. This next story is titled Don't Tell Anyone. This is a story of my father's. It happened in 1982 while my father was stationed on a military base in New Brunswick. One night, my father's best friend and his girlfriend left just after dark to go see Rhône at a movie theater. About an hour later, the friend and his girlfriend were back on the base. The car pulled in, and my father immediately noticed that it was damaged pretty badly and covered in several different colors of paint. My father asked them what had happened, why they had not gone to the movie. They brushed him off and just went to bed. A few days later, my father got his friend to tell him what had happened that night. They were driving along a stretch of highway, and they noticed lights coming from over a hill just ahead, where no lights should be because there was nothing around for miles. Just at the base of that hill was a parking lot for a park. A bunch of cars were pulling into the parking lot to investigate the lights, so my father's friend decided to pull in too. Everyone got out of their cars and was about to start hiking to the top of the hill when a large disc with flashing lights rose above the hill's peak and emitted a loud, strange sound. Several cars got banged up and everyone's panicked to get away, thus the transfer of paint. My father's friend drove back to the base as fast as possible. A few days later, men in black suits showed up on the base looking for people. They talked to my father's friend and then sent him on his way. My father asked him what the man wanted to see him for. The man told his friend that he better shut up, say nothing about anything that happened if he wanted to keep his military career. This next story is titled, Aliens Came to See the Comet. Back in the spring of 1997, a group of kids from my neighborhood were looking up at the night sky, observing the Hale-Bopp comet. After a while, we started to notice a red and white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction, like no aircraft I had ever seen or have ever seen since. At one point, they merged into one craft and then shot out 3 smaller crafts, although we couldn't tell whether it was a craft because they just appeared to be balls of light. This went on for a couple of hours. Right before the lights disappeared, they accelerated at lightning-fast speed into the darkness. We all went home terrified of what we saw. The next day, on the front page of our small hometown paper, it said it received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. To this day, whenever I see my friends that were there that night, we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what we saw, but to this day, none of us have ever seen anything like it. This next story is titled The Rural Visitor. As a kid, back in the 80s, I was spending the night at my aunt and uncle's house, which was out in the sticks in Tennessee. I was sleeping on the couch and woke up due to a bright light coming through the kitchen window and into the living room. I was looking towards the light, which was white and slightly flickering. After about 10 minutes, I turned my head as it was now keeping me awake. After a few minutes, I turned my head back towards the light and was about to go to sleep on the love seat. I see a tall, dark figure standing between myself and the light. I was frozen. I could not move, and I could not scream. It approached me, reached out, and began tapping on my forehead with what felt like a nail or something pointed. This went on for a few minutes until I must have fallen or was put to sleep. I woke up the next morning to a quiet house. I go into the bathroom and I have a red spot on my forehead, and the skin was slightly broken, but there was no blood. This next story is titled The No-Fly Zone. I haven't had any encounters with aliens, but my mom has. On September 11th, 2001, yes, I am serious, my mom went on a walk on the waterway after watching the news for hours. This was in the evening time, so the no commercial flights sanction was already in place. Well, on her walk, she looked up after feeling like somebody or something was watching her, and she saw a triangular aircraft floating above her. At first, she thought it might have been a military craft or some sort, but then realized it was making absolutely no noise. She said it was so low to the ground that she probably could have touched it if she wanted to. But before she could reach out and touch it, the craft zipped away, quickly, with no sound at all. This next story is titled Orbiting Near an Earthquake. In 2010, in Los Angeles, I was cleaning up around my apartment when I noticed my kitchen lamp was swinging and my building was rocking. Obviously, this was an earthquake. It lasted for a bit, and I called my friend to make sure that she was also okay. As we were chatting, I was standing out on my balcony, which overlooks Rhône Canyon, a popular hiking trail. I am so sorry if I said that wrong. I suddenly noticed this object hovering high in between the mountains. It was way too high to be a helicopter and too small and low to be a plane. What made it super strange was its shape and lack of movement. It was orb-esque and stood stagnant for about a solid 3 minutes before moving at a snail's pace to the west. I'm talking slower than any aircraft, blimp, kite, whatever that I have ever seen. It also seemed to reflect off the sun, but only at some angles. After moving towards the left and then once again staying completely still, it immediately darted at what seemed like an impossible speed in the opposite direction upwards and disappeared. This next story is titled Something Helped Us in the Swamp. I was about 12 years old at the time, and my family had a camp along the river in Louisiana. The only way you can get to it is by boat. So it was just my uncle, my cousin, and myself, and we were heading back to the boat launch on a Sunday night. Now, the boat we were in didn't have any working lights, so to see where we were going, my uncle would occasionally shoot a flare. We quickly ran out of flares that you shoot as it is around a 2-hour boat ride back to the landing. So I ended up on the front of the boat holding a regular flare as we were now on a much narrower stretch of the river. To our left, in the swamp, 2 large glowing balls suddenly appear. Then there was another one to the right. I was just trying to keep the flare from burning me, and my little cousin was freaking the frick out. After around 10 minutes of them navigating through the swamp, they formed a triangle above us on the river. It is hard to gauge how far up they were, but it was very visible. They continued to follow us for the rest of the journey back to the landing, and as soon as we arrived, they suddenly just disappeared. This all happened around 12 years ago, but it is something I will never forget. I don't talk about this stuff really, and usually just keep it to myself. This next story is titled, It Cast a Huge Shadow. This was about 40 years ago. We were camping in the summer in the woods behind a friend's house. Around 11 p.m., we had to walk back to the house for something. It was a full moon, and there was plenty of light, so we didn't take any flashlights. We went out of the woods and down a long lane that went along an open pasture between the woods and the house. We got what we needed and started to walk back. The moon was behind us, over our right shoulder. We could see our shadows on the ground ahead of us from the moon. As we were walking, we saw a black circle with no lights. It just looked like a black hole in the sky. It was very low above the trees and moving towards us very slowly. We all stopped. There was 4 of us, and we watched. It came over the trees and over the pasture, and then suddenly you could see a shadow moving on the ground where the moonlight was giving the thing a shadow just like us. And it went from northwest to southeast and passed over us and kept going until we couldn't see it anymore. It lasted for about 2 minutes. It didn't make any noise. It did not look like anything. Just a perfectly round black circle. It had no lights, and moonlight did not reflect off of it. It made a shadow that was about the size of a house. I don't know how high it was because I had no detail, but it seemed very low, like a couple of 100 feet. We told our parents the next day, but nobody believed us. This was in Ohio in 1982. This next story is titled The Missing Hour. Driving in the UK from a friend's dinner party, we set off at around 10 p.m. for a 15-minute drive home. There was myself, my wife in the front seat, and my 3 sons in the back of the car. We were driving near a USAF base in the southeast of England along a long straight piece of road when there was an incredible flash that my wife and I noticed, and it seemed to wake up one of the elder sons in the back seat. He would have been about 12 at the time. Something, I have no idea what it was, flew with absolute silence over the car. I saw it, my wife saw it, and my son in the back, who was awakened by the flash, also saw it. Something flew right over us, so close you could touch it, and it was big. We got home, discussed it a little bit, and concluded that the flash was a flare from the USAF base, and the large object that flew over us may well have been a Eurasian eagle owl, one of that had been spotted in the area before, and the whole situation was promptly forgotten. Fast forward just over a decade, and I and the son who was woken by the flash are talking about this weird incident over dinner when my youngest son, who didn't wake up during the event, tells us how he remembered it happening. He recalled an event that was vastly different than ours. He had never told this story before. He thought it was a dream until we started talking about it. He described how the car was stopped when we saw the flash. We weren't moving, and the low-flying object sat on top of us for a few seconds, then flew off before the car started again. Apparently, I completely ignored this stop/start and simply continued driving. Now, here's the really cool bit that we had never realized. My wife had made arrangements to call her sister when we arrived home safely. We left at around 10 p.m. for a 15-minute drive home. My wife called her sister around 11:45 to say that we had arrived home. I have no idea what happened that night. I was completely sober. My youngest son insists that something very odd happened. My wife is adamant that we took approximately 90 minutes to do a 15-minute drive home. Her sister backs this up. I might not know what happened that night, but I am secure in the thought that something did happen to us. This next story is titled The Daytime Shooting Star. I was driving down a road in the middle of the day. There are fields on both sides of the road. No other cars. I saw what looked like a falling star. It was a big, white ball of light with a tail, and it was hard to look at even with sunglasses on. I had time to pull over and stop, still watching it fall straight down. This thing was going way faster than it should have, and so I was struggling to get my phone out of my pocket without taking my eyes off of it. Here's where it gets really weird. Without warning, when it reached about eye level, it leveled off. I watched this thing go from vertical to horizontal in less than a second. It disappeared behind a line of trees, and I noped the hell out of there. This next incident is titled, It Rose Out of the Ocean. I used to live next to the beach in an apartment complex. One night, I was with one of my friends looking at the ocean from my balcony. The light from the moon was enough for us to watch the waves on the shore. We instantly saw a light on the ocean. It slowly came out of the water. What we saw was like an orb-shaped ball of light. It was so bright for a moment that I almost couldn't see the object itself. It kept going up slowly, and then it suddenly took off quickly into the dark sky. Everything happened in about 8 seconds. We both were so freaked out and went inside the apartment. Years later, I saw a report on National Geographic about orb-shaped lights flying around a forest in the United States. I knew it was the same thing that I saw. This next story is titled, It Wasn't a Police Car. This was 2012 or 2013. My ex and I were driving down a remote highway in rural West Tennessee late one night. I was in the passenger seat. It was a very open area, no trees, and surrounded on both sides by flat fields. I'm looking out the window to my right and see this thing traverse the sky. It was an artificial-looking blue light. Think the color of the lights on a cop car, but a little darker. It blinked with an even rhythm 3 or 4 times. The thing that stunned me was how fast it was moving. It was low to the horizon, and it moved from the area of the horizon in front of us to the area of the horizon behind us in about 3 to 5 seconds. I wasn't able to estimate size or closeness to Earth because of how fast it had happened, but it was huge. I've seen shooting stars that were close to Earth, and this was definitely not what that was. My ex-boyfriend, who was my boyfriend at the time, saw it too, and it freaked us both out. This next story is titled, I'm 27 years old, and I have been abducted by aliens. My story begins in what was my studio apartment at the time. The location was Tucson, Arizona, and at the time, I was 24 years old. It was an ordinary night. I was getting ready for bed. I had on my television that was playing an audiobook from my local library, when all of a sudden the power went out. I didn't think too much of it because it was a shit neighborhood in South Tucson, so I waited for the power to come back on. Eventually, it did. But something was wrong. I couldn't tell what it was, so I just went to bed while the audiobook continued to play. This is where the abduction began. The next thing I know, I am floating up into the sky. I look down and I see the roof to my studio, and my adjoining neighbor is gone. Not gone, just pushed. It was a portal. They had separated the matter, stretched it into a circle in order to get me out. When I was high enough, the portal closed and it made a sound. A sound that I can't really explain, but I know I can mimic it. When the portal closed, everything looked fine. Not a hair was out of place. As I'm floating, I am looking around the neighborhood. I've never seen it from this high up in my life. I look up to see what's pulling me in. It's an enormous circular spaceship. It's so enormous that it reminds me of Star Wars. I eventually pass out, and when I come to, I feel like I'm dreaming, but I'm not because my hand is grabbing something, and I know it's real. I'm laying face down on a foreign floor. The best way I can describe it is one of those gates they use to protect closed shops. But the one I'm laying on is much, much thicker and stronger. When I open my eyes, I see one of them staring at me. It's a tiny little gray alien with a big head and large black eyes. It has no nose or mouth, and I realize that they don't eat. Its body is tiny, so tiny that they have small torsos and string-like arms and legs. Their fingers are longish and slim. I realize why. So they can survive long term with no gravity. How can they develop any muscles, etc., in an environment with no gravity? As soon as I realize what has happened, that I have been abducted, I immediately go into a blind rage. I go on all fours and I charge the alien staring at me, screaming over and over, "I'm gonna rip your freaking eyes out." When suddenly, in a selected area around me, a blue light emanates. I can't move. I try with all the power I've got in me, but I can't move a bit of my body. The aliens don't move either. They just watch me struggle. Then the blue light disappears and I end up collapsing onto the floor, exhausted. It's then that I notice how surrounded I am. They are everywhere, but most aren't paying me any mind whatsoever. I see them flying around the ship. They are so lightweight that they move very fast in directions themselves with their minds. They remind me of fish. Now, I can't remember exactly, but I think I rushed the alien again, most likely screaming the same obscenities. But they put the blue light on again, only for a much shorter time. I'm completely spent at this point, and I can't even bring myself up. Then I hear it. It's a voice, but I'm not hearing it. It's inside of my head, like internal thoughts. But it's not my voice. It's one of the aliens, talking into my head. It said, "Hey, I'm just doing my job. We/I are/am not going to hurt you. We/I am/are just doing our/my job." Then I feel emotions. Emotions being pushed into my brain. This is not like how humans experience emotions brought on by a trigger. This was a feeling of guilt or remorse coming into my brain and then consuming my body from an outside force. And not only that, the emotion was amplified to such a level that I actually apologized to the aliens for my behavior. Writing this now, it's hard to believe, but it's true. Anyway, the next thing I know, I'm shambling down an enormous corridor. It is so enormous, it reminds me of a church. Beside me are 2 or maybe 3 aliens, one to my left, one to my right, and maybe one behind me. The reason I was shambling is because the gravity was so heavy. I could barely move. Back to the corridor, it was so tall that I don't think I could even see the top, and it was dark. The only light to be seen was from the chairs. The chairs. Oh God, the chairs. Bad memories about the chairs, man. All along the corridor to the left was a row of chairs. They were black steel and cast a green-bluish hue from them. The worst part was the people in them. People. Black, white, every race that you can think of. People dressed from different times too. Some had freaking rags on, dude. Like Pocahontas crap. Not all of them were filled, though. Like, there would be 5 in a group, and then several empty, and then 1 or 2 or 3 filled, and then empty ones again. Okay. I gotta catch my breath. Me and the aliens stopped at an empty chair. They put the thought in my head to get inside of the chair. I immediately start crying, begging them to not put me in one of those. I'm already sitting down in it. Their mental influence is overpowering. The alien tells me telepathically, "Calm down, everything's going to be fine. It's okay. You're going to be okay. I promise everything will be fine. I'm just doing my job." I take a deep breath and say, "Okay." The rest is blurs. I know they put something over my head that is connected to the chair. It's like a glass mask. I don't know what the purpose of the chair was. I theorize that it scans the person's brain, but I have no clue. The next thing I know, I'm in a room. It is bright white light from all directions. Even the floor is white light, but dimmed down just a bit. I'm naked, and in front of me are 2 women. One is a white woman with a slim build and bright hair, almost an orange, and the other woman is a heavyset black woman with curly hair. They are both naked, except for one thing. This thing covered their genitalia. It is like underwear, but it wasn't. It's not like anything we have on Earth. Let me explain what these women were doing. They were kissing, touching all over each other as I watched, and the whole time I'm watching the fabric that is covering them not moving. It doesn't fold, stretch, nothing. It's as if it's part of their skin. I can sense the aliens in my brain again. They are urging me to join them, and I do. But I don't do anything with them. I just sit with the women while they rub me, kiss me, etc. I can feel the aliens get upset that I'm not having you-know-what with them, and because I'm not getting anything happening. Some time passes, and I still haven't done anything. Blackout/time skip. We are nearing the end of my experience. I find myself on the table. You know, the one everybody talks about? Yeah, that table. It reminds me of like a surgical one. I can't say for sure what happened to me on that table. All I can say is with absolute iron certainty is that there was one abomination standing over me. He was tall as any human man. His head was like theirs, but smaller, and he had eyes, a nose, a mouth like ours, and he was just staring at me. I've never felt such hatred before in my life. I told him, if we ever met again, I will freaking kill you. He just keeps smiling at me. He had a face like us, and it burned into my mind. I will never forget it. And if I ever do meet him again, I will do my best to actually kill him. Next thing I know, I'm back in my bed, but I can't move, not one bit, but I still feel stuck, and I can see his freaking face outlined in my vision, like looking into a light and then looking away. When I could finally move, I checked my testicles and all over my body, and everything was okay. The only thoughts in my head were what I just experienced 100% happened, and what we call aliens are genetic engineers building something to do with humans. They don't want, need, eat, sleep, etc. They are like ants. One mind, one goal. I ended up telling a close friend and asked my neighbor if he had ever seen or heard anything weird last night. He just told me that some weird blue light was bothering him and confirmed that the power did go out. Anyway, that was my experience, not a very pleasant one, and I shake my head every time I hear someone say, I want to meet an alien. And when I'm with someone like that in person, I tell them, no, you freaking don't. You can believe the story or you cannot believe it. I know it freaking happened, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if anybody believes me or not. They are real, they are here, and they have a plan. Okay, so now that it is nighttime and I have completely freaked myself out, it is time to end this episode. I hope that you guys very much enjoyed this episode of Creepy Corner, and if you're interested in having your story read, whether it be true crime, paranormal, or just anything random that you want read on the podcast, email it to me at darkcrossroadspodcast@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to check out our website, www.darkcrossroadspodcast.com. You can find us anywhere on social media. Just type in Dark Crossroads or Dark Crossroads Podcast. And don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this podcast. With that said, don't forget to be weird, stay different, and don't trust anyone. Alrighty, guys. See you later. Bye. Dark Crossroads Podcast is brought to you by Problem Wildlife. Problem Wildlife serves Western Massachusetts and has been humanely protecting your house and family from unwanted pests for over 20 years. Take back your space with an animal control service that you can trust.
They are family-owned, fully licensed, and are knowledgeable and dependable. To find out more about their services, simply visit their website at www.problemwildliferemoval.com. Again, that's www.problemwildliferemoval.com. And the website will also be included in our show notes.